So this is the big one. This is the coconut wheelie. This is what everyone wants to learn all the time. And I get a lot of people at like skate events asking me how to do the coconut wheelie. Now, before I even begin talking about technique, normally I'd kind of bolt this on the end. Setup is everything. If you don't have the right setup, you have no chance of doing a coconut wheelie. You're going to make this so much harder for yourself. Freestyle wheels are essential. I've heard of people, oh, I can do it on street wheels, right? If you can, great, but you've made this so much harder than it needs to be. A freestyle wheel covers the axle nut and is basically crucial because you are going to be rolling on that edge. If your axle nut is sticking out at all, it'll hit the floor, you'll stop, you'll die, you'll bleed out, and your parents will miss you. It'll be awful. Don't do that. Now, there are lots of different freestyle wheels out there. Generally speaking, you want a harder wheel than a softer wheel for this. The setup that I'm sitting on is mine, and this has 95A seismics on. I will be using that board for most of this trick tip. This setup has 97A seismics on. I'll show you the difference later on because these slide so much easier. So when you're learning this, try and aim for a 97 or 99A wheel. Now the surface is also going to make a big difference. If your surface is bumpy and if it's rough, this becomes a lot more difficult. But at the same time, if you're on a really, really slick floor, you're not going to master the technique. Because on something really slippery, it's much easier to just let the board slide and do a primo slide, and it can scrape. It's very important you learn to control this and hold it just on the wheels. Now the final point before I get into the trick is the trucks are very, very crucial in this trick. Not only do they need to be just the right width to match the board, but if they're too loose, if they're too sloppy, you're going to run into all sorts of problems because as you're rolling like this, it tends to twist the board slightly. Now the front truck will bend. It doesn't need to be rock solid, but if it's like noticeably loose, as soon as you get onto the coconut wheelie, it's going to be unstable. Get some harder bushings and tighten it down a bit. That's all you're going to need. But now we can crack on with the actual trick. Your setup for a coconut wheelie is basically the same as going to heel side rail. So obviously it's very important you know how to do that first. However, this kind of position that I'm in now, this is for going to rail. I sometimes find with a coconut wheelie, it helps if your front foot's a little bit further up the board. It doesn't need to be so far forward as a Casper, but a little bit further forward tends to make this a little bit easier to control. So obviously what you're doing in a coconut wheelie is basically pulling up to rail and trying to control it before the board hits the floor. That's the crux of the whole trick. Now, at this point, if you're even considering doing this, I would hope you know how to heel side rail. I hope you already know how to do that, but it's very important you know how to do it well, because this is not going to work. That level of just quickness, lack of control, if you are still doing your rails like that, it's really going to end badly when you try and do a coconut wheelie. So before you even think about doing this rolling, try and focus on just being as controlled with a heel side rail as you can. Take it slow, pull it up carefully, and just try and have as controlled a descent down as you can. It's more or less silent. The way I'm doing this is I'm making sure my back foot is in contact with the board the whole way through. I should never ever lose contact with the board with this foot. I'm pulling it up through an arc and I can feel every single moment of that movement as I do it. So just to repeat, it's exactly the same as going to rail normally, but I'm controlling it as thoroughly as I can. Nice and gentle. You want to get to that point and then we can talk about doing it rolling. So this is where things are going to get a little weird. Now, normally when people ask me in person, there's this little demonstration I do using their arms, which sounds a little strange. But basically I'm going to reference Wing Chun, which is like a kind of Chinese boxing. I did for a couple of years. And there's something from that that helps me make sense of this trick. Basically there's a block called Jiu-Jitsu, if I remember right. It's been years. And what happens is you guide their arm. So as they punch, the idea is you guide their arm, and then at the last minute you kind of do this little flick motion. I'm exaggerating, it's not really that strong. But that's what's happening. You're guiding them through the motion that you want, and then you do this little kind of flick outwards with the wrist. What we're going to do is that only with our foot. as we pull the board up and we're guiding it through this arc, you have to know exactly what it feels like before it gets to this point. You have to know the exact point you need to do this, and then you're going to do that little jut. All you're going to do is you're going to push your ankle back the other way a fraction and lock your leg. Everything from that hip all the way down that side is just going to lock up. And that's what's going to hold this in place. There's no balance needed. This isn't really a wheelie in the standard sense because you never have to think about balance as long as you get that jutsao, that block, in at the right time and just lock it. And so now we reach the biggest problem that people have with coconut wheelies, and that's that you can't do these going slowly. When I first met Alex Foster, he asked me, how do you do a coconut wheelie? And I said, right, can you go to rail? And he went, yeah. I said, right, now do that going as fast as possible and try not to die. And he looked at me really confused. See, this isn't a trick you can do slowly at all. There's a reason that Pierre-Andre was the one who invented this, because he loved going fast. And most freestylers don't do that nowadays. See, if you push into this slowly, it's more or less impossible to hold it in the right position. Now, what's happening is as soon as you start lifting it up, you're sliding on the side of the wheels. This creates a lot of friction. And that slows you down very, very quickly. If you roll into this slow, there's no chance that you can have time to catch it and hold it and get in position. You're just going to drop and you're going to fall off. So make sure you're going as fast as you dare. Actually, no, go even faster than that. So this is the reason I was talking about wheels at the start of this video. I am normally an advocate for a slightly softer wheel. A lot of the places I skate are pretty rough. But as soon as you get up on the side of a 95A wheel, you feel it dragging. You feel the friction really slowing you down. Now, as I said earlier, I've got 95A seismics on this one, and this board has 97A seismic focus. They have exactly the same shape, which is also important because some wheels don't have much material on the outside edge. They burn away quite quickly. But the additional hardness of the 97A means that I can go much faster and much further with much less resistance during the coconut wheelie. You'll notice that at this point I still haven't talked about balance, which is kind of weird for a wheelie trick, I guess. But there is very little balance to be done. I wasn't joking earlier, like, it doesn't feel like you balance at all. There is an issue with weight distribution, which is slightly different. Basically, because you pull up and you're controlling this with your back leg, most of your weight wants to be on this leg. As soon as you transfer weight to the front leg at all, there's too much weight at the front, there's too much friction at the front, the board stops dead, it pitches you off. So you'll see a lot of guys who sit on a Coco and they're basically leaning backwards slightly. You don't want to be too far back, but all your weight wants to be down through this leg into that back wheel, which then begs the question of what is the front foot doing? You've only got, say, 30% of your weight on it, maybe not even that. Well, the front foot is all about steering. You watch a lot of guys who've just learned coconut wheelies and they're going off in a circle. The reason that's happening is because the front foot dictates where the board's going to go. Once you've got up, all your weight's here, you just ride it out, that leg's locked, but you can't neglect this leg. This one is going to force the board to stay in a straight line because it's naturally going to want to curve, probably that way. So you have to make sure this leg doesn't let it wander. Just pull that foot back slightly if you see it starting to turn. And that's all you've got to do. Don't try and think of it as trying to, oh, balance, 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 because you'll go. Just trust in the board. Pull it up, get it into position, and lock that leg, and then just sit on it and ride it out until you run out of speed. Once you can coconut wheelie well, you can stay on it, you can ride it smoothly. It's time to start thinking about what you do at the end of it. Now, to begin with, you can have two options. The first one is one that is predominantly done by amateurs, which is kind of a harsh thing to say, but you see a lot of people who will slide it until it runs out of steam, And then the inevitable happens. Because once you slow down too much, there's nothing holding you in position. The momentum dies and you just drop back to rail and stop dead. And it's like, well, yeah, you can do flip tricks from rail then, but it doesn't look very good, at least not to me. You've got this thing that's got all this speed and all this power, and then you've just killed it and you've stopped. And that seems antithetical to what this trick is about for me. So I would advocate the other way. Before you slow down too much, before dropping to rail becomes inevitable, just drop it down to the wheels. And it's just like going out of rail. It's really that simple. You're just going to push on your feet slightly, just push your toes forwards and just let it go. And providing you do that early enough, while you've still got a bit of speed, you can roll off and keep the line going. It has so much more flow that way. I always think that's going to look better. But once you can do that, then you can start thinking about how to make the coconut wheelie your own. What tricks you can do out of it. And that's really difficult. I don't think I've ever done a trick out of a coconut wheelie that hasn't been just insanely difficult to learn. And that's why most people only ever learn one. They'll find something, usually something they've invented because so few people have done tricks out of coconut wheelies, and then they stick with it. Now, I can show you some of the ones that I can do, but I'm sure as hell not doing them here. That's something for another time. So maybe I'll revisit this in a few months or a year, and I can show you some of the options. But for now, just focus on getting a good, clean, fast coconut wheelie and enjoy it, because it's one of the most fun tricks there is. Why? Why would you do this? Why? Ah.